the neighborhood was something else. Of course, I fired them halfway through. It's not always roses and dollars. Yeah. Hi everyone, welcome back to Black Equity. My name is Abby and today's video is going to be completely honest and completely off script. I say this, but I lied. I totally have a book in front of me. Okay, today I'm going to be talking about the ugly, because one of the things that I really want to do with this channel is to share everything that I'm going through as I build wealth through real estate. And this journey comes with a lot of highs, but also comes with a lot of lows. And in my last flip, I experienced what I would say have been the lowest of lows. Now, it's just been my second flip, so I know that I haven't experienced a lot compared to people who have done 20 or 200. But for a second one that I expected to be a little bit easier than the first, it wasn't. It definitely wasn't. So today I'm going to be telling you the major things that happened and why, after really thinking about it, I came to the conclusion that maybe I shouldn't have flipped this property. First thing that I experienced were contractor issues. I know that I've spoken about how to hire contractors, and I think that even though I had issues, I could kind of predict the kind of issues that I would have had because of the decisions that I made while I was hiring. So I'll tell you what happened. When I first started the project, I knew exactly what I wanted to do and the scope of work. I started interviewing people for demo and just like other jobs. I narrowed it down to 2 groups of people, and I had a first choice and then I had a second choice. Now, unfortunately, the first choice contractors were not available till like a couple of weeks later. So I was like, okay, instead of interviewing more people, let me just settle for the second choice. Shouldn't have done that. So the second choice people, they started the work and things were going well the first day. And then on the third day, they came and told me that they quoted too low for the amount of work. Their quote was very similar to my first choice. They quoted me $4,300, I think, or $4,200. The quote for my first choice people was probably $5,000. So it really wasn't based off of the numbers that I chose the second choice. Like, the first choice was more expensive, but my gut told me that they would be a bit better than the second, but I still went with the second since they weren't available. So they told me that they quoted too low and that the work was a lot more than they expected. To be fair to them, when they were demoing upstairs, and I'll try and insert some videos here, the insulation in the ceiling upstairs was like 3 times the normal amount of insulation. But if they had been a bit more knowledgeable or a bit more experienced, in my opinion, they would have seen that when they started, and then they would have probably used like a vacuum or something to suck out the insulation and then demo the ceiling. But what they ended up doing was demoing the entire ceilings, and then all that insulation fell to the floor, and then they now started like packing that insulation into bags. Now, because the insulation was a lot more, it ended up costing me too more because I hired a second bin for disposal. That wasn't technically their fault, but because they didn't really have the knowledge on how to handle it, then they were like overwhelmed. Demo was supposed to take a total of 5 days, but it ended up taking them 5 days just to demo upstairs. And I think one of the guys got hurt off the job, so he couldn't come, and they were a lot slower. And long and short, they came to me and said, you know what, we can't complete this job. They ended up quitting halfway through the job, which was really frustrating. But the good thing was that the first choice guys were then available at the time that they quit, so I just had to hire them. Now, why this was really annoying was because demo cost me money. Like, right off the bat, it cost me more money than I anticipated. So instead of just spending like $5,000 up front, I ended up spending $2,800 thereabout, plus bins, 2 bins instead of 1 bin. And then I ended up paying the other demo guys like another 2 or 3 grand, which is, it basically took me over budget. I think that in retrospect, what I should have done was just started my project later, just waited for the guys that I felt like I could trust more. So that was the first thing, but it wasn't the only thing that happened with contractors. Towards the end, if you follow me on Instagram at @blackequity_, you'll see that I had issues with the painters. During the entire flip, we were under lockdowns. Ordering materials and getting anything for the project was a pain because it would take at least 2 to 3 business days because we couldn't go into a store to purchase any products. When it came to the painter, I had ordered the paint ahead of time as with other materials. I knew the specific colors that I was going to use for the doors, the trim, the walls downstairs, the walls upstairs, and the feature wall. And when I ordered all the materials, I put them in their respective places and I told him exactly what should be used where. I thought it was fine, and it seemed fine in the beginning. But when he started the project and he started painting, he realized at some point that the paint wasn't enough. But instead of telling me that, hey, this isn't going to be enough material, I'm going to need 2 more gallons of paint. Basically, he went to a store that he could do easier curbside pickup. They were a bit faster, but that store wasn't a Home Depot. And if anyone knows anything about paint, a white paint in Lowe's is very different from a pure white paint in Home Depot because they use different formulas, and white isn't white when it comes to the paint world. So when I walked into the house after he had started the paint job and like done a second coat with the second paint, I could see streaks of paint that were different from the original paint. And I confronted him about it, like, why did you do that? And all he said to me was, oh, he ran out of paint. And then the second thing was when they were painting around the skylight, I'll insert a video here if I can find it. Instead of prepping, which prep is like the main thing that you do before you paint anywhere. Oh my gosh, the prep work was horrendous. Of course, I fired them halfway through. He did no prep. So he ended up painting on like the window itself. And once I fired them, I had to go and like gently scrape the windows just so that like it doesn't look like a horrible job. So yeah, that was the second major thing. And of course, there was the whole drama with the fireplace being painted black and, you know, whatever. I don't want to talk about the fireplace. I really just hated that fireplace. I wish I had demoed it but anyway, yeah, the fireplace was a regret, but I'm not going to talk about it. Thankfully, one of the good things that I did with the contractors was, and that I always recommend, was that I didn't pay them up front. I didn't pay them like a chunk up front. I paid them with every single stage. So for example, even with the demo guys, imagine if I had paid them the entire amount up front. That would have been horrible because they would have now held like my money hostage when they couldn't have finished the work. But because I paid them after the job, then I was able to control how much and renegotiate how much I would pay them. And the same thing with the painter was I paid per stage. And so when I fired them, I didn't give them their entire funds. I gave them some money because they had done some of the job, but I didn't give them the entire thing. And for that, I'm grateful, and I will forever recommend, do not pay contractors everything up front. Don't even pay them most up front. If you can create a strategy or a payment plan where you pay them in sections after particular jobs have been completed and you're satisfied, that's really the way to go. There were a lot of other issues that I had with the general contractor where he would start the job and, you know, not show up on some days. And towards the end, I brought out my Nigerian self, because if you don't know, I'm Nigerian and we're less than patient people sometimes. And so I really brought out my Nigerian self after, and I like had a real conversation with him that, look, you're costing me more money by not being on the job when you should be. And if that continues to happen, then your money is on the line too. And you know, he got real with me, and then things progressed after that. Well, so sometimes you just really need to have a conversation with your contractors if they're not living up to the expectation, and understand why. I mean, sometimes it might be a legitimate reason. Other times, like in this case, it's just he was managing a lot of jobs and tried to juggle everything at the same time. So the second thing was the neighbors. Let me just be real. The area that we bought the property in was less than stellar. The neighborhood was this shy from the ghetto. Am I allowed to say that? But really, that's just the truth. So the neighbors were a little bit challenging. On one hand, the neighbors that were directly beside us, and the house, I'll show you a picture of the house, the front of the house if I can, because I don't think I ever showed that. But the houses were very close together. Like, you could probably hear what is happening in the neighbor's house type of close. So the neighbor that was to our right hand side, if you're facing the house, they were really good, and they actually watched out for us, and they were the ones that told us that someone moved into our shed. But the neighbor on the left hand side was just extremely nosy, used to try and like tell our contractors what to do. I left my husband to deal with that. And then just like the neighborhood was challenging because, like I said, someone moved stuff into our shed. There was a lot of times where there was trash that was dumped behind the backyard. So the backyard backed onto an alleyway, and because of that, you know, people would come in the night and just like leave furniture, like full-on furniture, dressers, mattresses, tires, clothes, just all of that type of stuff, and they would just trash it. So that cost me a lot more money because I had, in total, I think I hired 5 contractor bins, and I'm talking like 20-yard sized bins. So they're not small bins like your regular home garbage bins, they're huge bins. And I hired 5 of those, and that, I don't even want to tell you the price. What I would have done in retrospect was just not bought the house. I may have like fenced the backyard a bit more initially. We didn't plan to fence the yard. It already had a bit of a fence, but we didn't plan to fence it, and maybe I would have fenced that part initially. I don't know if hiring security cameras would have done anything, just because they would have probably like stolen the security cameras too, but I would have padlocked the shed in retrospect. The neighborhood was something else. I was really glad once we sold it because of the neighborhood. Anyway, and then the last thing that happened, and probably for me the most devastating thing that happened, was during the selling process. After the house had been completed, we hired cleaners, we hired a photographer, we listed the house on the market ourselves. The market was definitely different from when we sold the first property. So when we sold the first property, it was in a seller's market. Things were super strong to the seller's side, and it took like 5 seconds to sell the house. But in this second flip property, it was becoming more of a balanced market, and houses were still going off pretty quickly, but it also depended on the neighborhood. So if the house was in a great neighborhood, it would sell in like 3 days. But because our house was not in the greatest neighborhood, then it took a little bit longer. I think at the end of the day, it probably took like 2 weeks to sell, which is still really good. You know, it could have taken a couple of months to sell, and some houses did take a couple of months to sell. But ours took maybe like 2 weeks or so, or 2.5 weeks to sell. The people that put the house under contract first, they decided that they were going to do an inspection, and that was totally fine. We actually ended up having multiple offers, but they were all conditional on inspection and financing, and that was completely fine with us. But when they did the inspection, their inspector came and told them that the house had knob and tube wiring throughout the home. And we demoed most of the property. We did some new electrical. We didn't rewire the entire house because it was up to date, but we did add in some electrical stuff. And the house did not have knob and tube wiring. The contractor told them that it had like asbestos on the outside or something like that. And these are like really major claims. Knob and tube wiring means that getting insurance on your property is going to be difficult or next to impossible. And asbestos is a health hazard. So these were really major things. And after that, the buyers pulled out of the deal. Honestly, I was devastated. Like, my husband and I were pretty heartbroken when it happened. My husband was like, I'm pretty sure none of those things are true. I had to get a number of electricians to go through the property to, you know, check out the basement and see what was going on. And everyone came back and said nothing. Like, there was no knob and tube wiring. The entire electrical system had been updated. And same thing with the asbestos. All of that was proven false. And it was heartbreaking because I think I was just also so tired after the entire renovation process, and I was just like, okay, so what does this mean? I took a day and I didn't cry, but I was like, yeah, like, I think I was beyond tears, to be honest. So after that, I picked myself up and I was like, okay, cool. Well, you know, we have to keep going. We have to move on. So we fixed like the minor little thing, like a tap wasn't connected properly. And in the meantime, thankfully, we continue to have interest and continue to have showings. Because it was a balanced market, our showings weren't as many as in the first project where I had like 40 or 50 showings in 1 week. In this one, we had maybe like 20 showings, which is still pretty solid. 3 or 4 days later, we had another offer, and that offer was actually firm. So it didn't require an inspection or financing, and the buyer wanted to close quickly. So in that sense, things worked out. But for those couple of days before we got another offer, I was just, yeah, I was upset. And now I know, like, things like that can happen. Like, buyers pull out of offers all the time for whatever reason, and even though that inspection report wasn't accurate, the buyers had the right to pull out based off of their perceived accuracy of their inspection report. So that does happen, and honestly, I think it just taught me that in this business, you have to really have a strong mind and a really just thick skin, because things will happen that are very disappointing. Things will happen that will cost you more money and that you'll need to revise and you'll need to change strategies. And it's just important to be able to take a day, you know, breathe, feel your feelings, but get up the next day and push through and figure it out. We go again. Like, we're gonna do another one. So that's just it. I really hope this video helped anyone, and just even gave you like the truth into what a flip or a project sometimes entails. It's not always roses and dollars. It's sometimes like crazy people and bad advice and pulling out of deals and extra money that you didn't really account for being spent. But in the long run, I still really believe in this, and I think that every experience is an experience that I can use for the next project and that I can help you guys with. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this. If you have any questions, leave them in the comment section. Connect with me on Instagram. All right, bye.